She's coming back.
Ernie?
Get it out!
Come on. We are talking Fear Below from 2025, directed by Matthew Holmes. And this is a shark attack movie that tries to do something a little bit different, have a little bit of a unique property to it. So what is the story of Fear Below? Well, it actually takes place in the 1940s, and it follows a diving company, which is a very sort of low-budget diving company, shall we say. 3 employees, and they accept a job from some kind of guys that want them to recover something from a car which has ended up in a river. They seem a little bit kind of shady, and they don't want any kind of questions being asked, but they're paying good money. So this kind of diving company agrees. Go out to the site where this crash has happened with this car under the water. But little do they know, there's a 12-foot bull shark in this river, which seems to be maybe pregnant and therefore acting particularly aggressive. Now, obviously this kind of puts their stakes a little bit higher, but these guys have even more to worry about when they find out this group that has hired them are actually criminals wanting to recover stolen bullion and are basically forcing them to go in and getting this this kind of loot with the kind of the threat of death if they don't. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So I recently watched another shark movie called Dangerous Animals, and that was pretty good. And I'm pleased to say this is also a pretty good shark movie. Ironically, they are both kind of set in Australia and both about a criminal element and sharks. So, you know, what are the odds, eh? Now, let's talk about what's specifically good about this movie. So this is set in the 1940s, and this gives it its kind of unique selling point in a way, because it's a period piece, and as such, for example, the technology is of its time. They're using kind of deep sea diving style suits. They're not nimble like scuba divers. They're kind of clunky and slow, and they're having to kind of like walk across the kind of like the riverbed and things like that. So it's a very different style of kind of diving to what we've seen in many kind of shark movies. And on the subject of the 1940s, I actually think that they did a really good job of selling you on this fact. I think the costuming was all fantastic. You know, some of the attitudes here are of its time. For example, this diving crew consists of the kind of the owner Ernie, and he's got like a woman and a kind of Aboriginal guy working for him, and you know, there's the kind of the sexist and racist sort of attitudes that by today's standards obviously kind of stand out, but in the 1940s were kind of quite commonplace about these two kind of individuals working for this kind of other guy and stuff. So that's all there. You know, we've got people that are constantly sort of smoking and stuff. So it's all pretty good, I think, about delivering a believable movie which is kind of taking place in this kind of 1940s. And because it is of this time period, obviously, you know, there's little technology really that we sort of see today, and as such they have to make do with the technology of its time and stuff and like that. So that was all pretty good. I gotta say, I think the acting is actually pretty solid in this movie. I thought everyone here did a believable job, and you know, I actually kind of quite like the kind of the characters here. They all seemed, even the criminals sort of seemed like quite charismatic, and the kind of the leader guy from this sort of criminal sort of little gang here, he's kind of like into play when he's sort of trying to sort of like converse with our kind of protagonists and stuff. Again, I kind of quite like the back and forth between them. That it was well played. It seems sort of, you know, quite kind of like realistic to a degree. So that was all sort of pretty good. Well-rounded characters. You know, some we have this kind of like they hire this fisherman to try and kind of catch this shark initially, and he's like your typical kind of like Aussie kind of stereotype, but he's kind of quite a sort of fun character. So I enjoyed all of the characters here. The shark itself, this is obviously a lower budget movie, especially when you compare it to something like Dangerous Animals. But I think what the movie does here is it's because this is taking place primarily in this kind of like this riverbed with kind of muddy, murky water. The shark, you know, is swimming around, but it's a lot of the time is obscured by the kind of the silt kind of rising up from the riverbed and stuff. And as such, you know, you can kind of get away with it not being like full-on hero shots and stuff because quite realistically, the visibility is quite low down there. So you can see this thing moving around. There's a few times where it kind of breaches. And I got to say that they've used a mix from what I can tell of practical and a little bit of kind of CGI here and there. But when we see it practically, you know, I thought it was kind of quite good when we sort of see it sort of head and breaching and stuff. And you know, they've used like a kind of like a plastic fin and stuff to kind of give you some you know, surface shots and things like this. So I actually kind of quite enjoyed the shark effects. There's maybe one or two instances where some CGI looks a little bit kind of, you know, more obvious, but it's sparsely used, to be honest with you. So I didn't mind it as much, to be honest. And I think this does have a little bit of a kind of a lower budget, you know, fare to it, to be honest. But I think the story was very engaging. I thought, you know, the fact that this is kind of on Australia, it's sparsely populated, so you're not running into kind of like random people as such, gave it this kind of sense of, you know, these people what are they going to do? How are they going to kind of escape? These criminals seem kind of charismatic but kind of ruthless at this kind of the same sort of time. So all of that I kind of quite enjoyed. I thought it was an enjoyable movie with a kind of a good plot. Nothing too complicated. It's a relatively kind of simple plot, but it was effective for the story. Decent characters. Quite an, you know, a fun kind of like shark scenario. The shark effects being, you know, pretty good as well. And they've not overdone the shark. It's not like a 25-foot, you know, Jaws sort of style shark. And you know, a lot of the kind of the time that people are talking about how there are sharks in this river. I mean, there's no mention of crocodiles, which I found a little odd because I would have thought that would have been the more obvious thing. But you know, whatever. But yeah, overall, it was an enjoyable movie with an engaging plot and likeable characters. Do I have any critiques of this movie? No major critiques, I'm going to say. I have a few kind of like minor quibbles here and there. Outside of the kind of the general sort of a lower budget feel of it, which I think may be noticeable by some. Outside of that, I would say there's a couple of decisions here where I think, I don't know if that was kind of completely kind of realistic. For example, we see a scene early on where our kind of criminals are driving with this kind of this gold in the back, and they seem to be sort of driving erratically. And I'm thinking, well, surely you'd be trying to drive pretty safe if you were, you know, if you had all this kind of money in the or gold in the back and things like this. And then when they kind of crash into the river, our kind of like, you know, crime boss guy shoots the driver and then just kind of leaves his body in the river. And at that point, they don't know there's a shark in there. And I thought, well, you know, if you were trying to kind of hide the tracks, and you know, you don't want to kind of let people know that there is this kind of like sunken gold there, surely you wouldn't leave a trail like a dead body that could potentially get washed up. Now, coincidentally, it's eaten by the shark, but they didn't know that was in there at the time. So again, there's some kind of elements here that we're thinking, well, you know, there's some kind of small logic issues. There's a scene towards the end where our kind of head criminal guy has a clear window of escape, even with the gold, and getting away with it, because you've got to think there's no, like, you know, the technology this time, once he's away, they can't really identify him and things like this, and there's, you know, again, it's sparsely populated. He could have got away quite easily at one point, but he chooses to do something else, which is kind of like, you know, whatever. And then a couple of bits where, you know, we have our criminals kind of shooting in the water at our protagonists, and that totally would have killed them, but, you know, whatever. So there's a few sort of lapses in logic and things like that in this movie, which ultimately kind of make it feel a little bit more B-movie, a little bit more kind of schlocky at times, rather than sort of being really kind of like gritty or realistic. But overall, I think the movie is still a fun movie. It's a good shark movie that I think has this kind of fun period setting, which gives it its own kind of a unique selling point and personality and kind of and style. With good characters. I would check it out. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. It was an engaging movie that had me hooked in, so to speak. Have you seen Fear Below? What were your thoughts? Please do let me know what your thoughts are, and I look forward to seeing you next time.